The horse would not stop screaming. Alara Whitmore dropped her travel bag in the mud and ran toward the sound before she even understood what she was running toward. A gray mare had reared up inside the training paddock, her front legs slashing at the air, her eyes wide and white with fear. Two stable boys stood frozen at the fence, too afraid to move closer. The rope around the mare's neck had caught on a broken post, and every time she pulled back, the wood dug deeper into her skin. Alara had traveled 3 days to reach Sternemoor estate. She had not even reported to the main house yet, but she had spent her whole life around horses, and she knew that in the next few seconds, that mare was going to break her own neck. "Someone cut the rope," she shouted, climbing over the fence without thinking twice. Nobody moved. Then a man appeared from the far side of the stable, moving fast but not rushed, the way people move when panic will only make things worse. He was tall, with dark hair falling into his eyes, and sleeves rolled up past his elbows. He did not look at Alara. He looked only at the horse. "Easy," he said, low and steady, stepping toward the mare with his palms open. "Easy now. Nobody is going to hurt you." The mare's ears twitched toward his voice. She was still trembling, still pulling, but she had stopped screaming. "The rope is caught on the post," Alara said, keeping her own voice calm to match his. "If she pulls back one more time, it will snap her neck." "I know." He was close enough now to reach the rope, but he did not grab it. He let the mare smell his hand first, let her feel his breath, let a full 10 seconds pass before he even touched her halter. "I need something sharp. Quickly, but do not run. Running will spook her worse." Alara pulled a small folding knife from her coat pocket, the one her father had given her before he became too sick to work, and walked it over slowly, her hand steady despite her racing heart. The man took it without a word of thanks, sliced through the rope in one clean motion, and stepped back as the mare's head dropped and her whole body shuddered with relief. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The mare stood shaking but safe, and the two stable boys finally found the courage to approach with a fresh lead. "That was well done," the man said, finally looking at Alara properly. His eyes were a deep, quiet brown, the kind that seemed to be thinking several things at once and revealing none of them. There was something about the way he carried himself that did not match his rough work clothes, though she could not have said exactly what it was. Maybe it was the stillness in his shoulders. Maybe it was the way he had not panicked when everyone else had. "You handled her well too," Alara said, brushing mud from her sleeve. "Most people would have just tried to pull the rope free and gotten kicked for it. Most people have not spent their whole life around horses that hate being told what to do." A faint smile crossed his face, there and gone in an instant. "You are new." "Alara Whitmore. I am the new head groomswoman. I was told to report today, though I did not expect my first duty to involve a rescue." "Colum," he said simply, offering no last name, no title, nothing more. "I work the stables here." "Well, Colum, you may have just saved me from losing my position on my very first hour." "I doubt that. You climbed a fence to save a horse you had never met, before you even unpacked your bags. Whoever hired you made a good choice." There was something in the way he said it, plain and sincere, that made Alara feel seen in a way she had not expected from a stranger. She studied him for a moment, trying to place his accent, which was too smooth, too careful, for a man who mucked stalls for a living. But she pushed the thought aside. People ended up in strange places for strange reasons. She, of all people, understood that better than most. "I should find the housekeeper," she said. "I was told to report to a Mrs. Pemberton. She will be in the East Wing kitchen at this hour. I can show you if you like." They walked together across the yard, past long rows of stables built from gray stone, past a training ring where a young colt was being led in slow circles. The estate was enormous, far larger than anything Alara had ever worked on before. Sternemoor stretched out in every direction, its main house rising in the distance like something out of a painting, with towers on either end and ivy climbing the western wall. It should have felt intimidating. Instead, walking beside this quiet stranger, she felt strangely calm. "You are not from around here," Colum said, glancing sideways at her. "Your accent has a bit of the coast in it." "Blackmere," she said. "A small fishing town, 3 days south of here. My father trained horses for the local lord before his health failed him. I have been doing the same work since I was old enough to hold a brush. And your father, is he well now?" "He is resting. My mother cares for him. I send home whatever wages I can." She had not meant to say so much to a man she had known for 10 minutes, but there was something easy about talking to him, something that made the words come without effort. "This position pays better than anything I could find near home. I could not turn it down." "Sternemoor pays its staff fairly," Colum said. "Whatever else you might hear about this place, that much is true." "What else might I hear?" He hesitated, just slightly, before answering, that the family who owns it keeps strange hours. That the Duke is rarely seen. People like to make mysteries out of things they do not understand. And do you understand it? Better than most, he said. And there was something almost amused in his voice, though his face stayed serious. Here we are. They had reached a low stone doorway leading into the kitchens, warm light and the smell of fresh bread spilling out into the yard. A stout woman in an apron looked up from a table covered in flour and immediately fixed Alara with a sharp, assessing stare. You must be the new groomswoman, she said. You are late. I stopped to save a horse from choking on a rope, Alara said. And to her surprise, Colm laughed. A short, warm sound that seemed to catch him off guard as much as her. That will do as an excuse, Mrs. Pemberton said, though a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Colm, do not keep the girl standing in the doorway all day. I was only walking her over, he said. I will leave her in your capable hands. He gave Alara a small nod, the kind that felt more meaningful than a formal goodbye, and turned back toward the stables. She watched him go for a moment longer than she meant to, noticing the easy, unhurried way he moved, before Mrs. Pemberton cleared her throat and pulled her attention back to the tasks ahead. Over the following hour, Alara was shown to her small room above the stable offices, given a list of her duties, and introduced to more staff than she could hope to remember by name. But throughout it all, her mind kept drifting back to the stable hand who had appeared out of nowhere with calm hands and quiet eyes, who spoke like someone who had read far more books than his position would suggest. She did not think much of it at the time. Estates like Sternemoor collected all kinds of people, she told herself. Perhaps he had once worked in a grander house and fallen on hard times. Perhaps he was simply well-spoken by nature. There were 100 simple explanations, and she settled on believing whichever one required the least thought. That evening, after her trunk had been carried up and her uniform laid out for the morning, Alara walked back down to the stables to check on the gray mare one last time. She found the horse calm and settled in a fresh stall, already looking better than she had that afternoon. And there, sitting on an overturned crate nearby with a small notebook in his hands, was Colm. He looked up, startled, and quickly closed the notebook, tucking it into his coat. Checking on your patient? Alara asked, nodding toward the mare. She had a rough day. I wanted to make sure she was settling in before the night. That is kind of you. Alara stepped closer to the stall, running a hand along the mare's neck. The horse leaned into her touch, already trusting. What were you writing? Nothing important. He stood, brushing off his trousers, something guarded settling over his expression that had not been there before. Just notes on the horses. Which ones need extra attention? Which ones are healing well? It was a reasonable answer, the kind any careful stable hand might give, and yet something about the quickness of his response, the way he had hidden the notebook before she could see even a glimpse of it, stayed with her longer than it should have. Well, she said, deciding not to press. Thank you again for today. I think I would have managed without you, but it certainly would have taken longer, and I might have ended up covered in more mud than I already was. You would have managed, he agreed. You did not hesitate. That says more about a person than anything else. Is that your way of giving a compliment? Perhaps it is. The faint smile returned, warmer this time, reaching all the way to his eyes. Good night, Alara Whitmore. Good night, Colm. She walked back to her room beneath a sky just beginning to darken, the first stars appearing faint and scattered above the towers of the great house. She told herself that her curiosity about the quiet stable hand was nothing more than the natural interest anyone might feel toward an unusual new colleague. She told herself that the strange, careful way he spoke, the notebook he had hidden so quickly, the accent that did not quite fit his work clothes, meant nothing at all. She would later realize, wrong about almost all of it. But that first night at Sternemoor, walking back to her small room with the smell of hay and horses still on her hands, Alara Whitmore only knew one thing for certain. She had come to this estate looking for steady work and a way to help her family survive a hard season. She had not expected to feel, on her very first day, that something important had already begun. Somewhere behind her, in the stables she had just left, Colm stood alone with the mare, running a gentle hand along her neck exactly where Alara's had been. He glanced toward the great house in the distance, its windows lit gold against the darkening sky, and then back toward the small room above the stable offices where the new groomswoman had disappeared for the night. He had spent 3 years pretending to be someone he was not, hiding from a life that felt too heavy to carry, and in 3 years, no one at Sternemoor had ever looked at him the way Alara Whitmore had looked at him today, not with curiosity about his name or his position, not with calculation about what he might be worth. She had looked at him simply as a man who had helped her save a frightened horse, nothing more and nothing less. It was, he thought, the first honest moment he had shared with anyone in longer than he cared to admit. And it terrified him more than he expected. The scream cut through the stable yard before dawn had even broken. Ilara bolted upright in bed, heart hammering, and was out the door and down the stairs before she had fully woken. Smoke was rising from the far end of the stable block, thick and gray against the pale morning sky, and inside the smoke she could hear horses kicking against their stalls in panic. "Fire in the hay store," someone shouted. "Get the horses out first. The hay can burn." Ilara ran toward the nearest stall, pulling her scarf up over her mouth and nose, and began working the latches as fast as her shaking hands would allow. One horse, then two, then three, guided out into the yard, where stable boys waited to lead them further from the smoke. Her eyes stung and her lungs burned, but she kept moving, kept counting stalls, refusing to stop until she was certain every animal was accounted for. It was Colm who found her near the last stall, deep inside the smoke where visibility had dropped to almost nothing. "You need to get out," he said, gripping her arm firmly but without cruelty. "The roof beam above the hay store is already weakening. If it comes down, this whole section goes with it." "There is one more horse," Ilara coughed, pulling against his grip. "The young colt, Ash. He is still in the end stall." Colm's face went still for half a second, and then he was moving before she had even finished speaking, faster than she had seen him move before, disappearing into the smoke toward the far stall. Ilara followed despite every instinct telling her not to, and found him already working the latch, the colt rearing and screaming inside, terrified beyond reason. "Talk to him," Colm said. "He knows your voice from training. I will get the door." Ilara pressed herself as close to the stall as the smoke allowed and began speaking in the low, steady voice she used every morning during training, telling the colt that he was safe, that he was going to be fine, that all he needed to do was walk forward. It took 3 long, agonizing seconds, but the colt's ears finally turned toward her voice, and the moment Colm pulled the door open, the animal bolted straight past them both toward the open air. They stumbled out together into the yard just as a great cracking sound echoed from behind them, and the beam above the hay store finally gave way, sending sparks and burning straw into the morning air. Ilara fell to her knees, coughing hard, and Colm dropped down beside her, one hand steady on her back until the coughing eased. "That was too close," he said, his voice rough from smoke, but his eyes were fixed on her with something that looked almost like fear, though not for himself. "We got him out," Ilara managed, wiping soot from her face with a trembling hand. "We got all of them out." Around them, the rest of the staff had gathered buckets and formed a line from the well, working to keep the fire from spreading further into the main stable block. It took nearly an hour before the flames were finally brought under control, leaving only the old hay store as a smoking ruin, thankfully separated from the stalls where the horses were kept. When the worst of it was over, Ilara sat on an overturned trough, exhausted, her hands blackened and her dress ruined beyond saving. Colm brought her a cup of water without a word and sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You did not have to come back in for me," she said. "I was not going to leave you in a burning building," he said simply, as though the answer were obvious, especially not for a horse who does not even appreciate how much trouble he caused. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it, surprising them both. "He is young. He will learn to appreciate it eventually. Perhaps." Colm studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "You were very brave in there. Most people freeze when the smoke gets that thick. So were you." She looked at him properly then, taking in the soot on his face, the burn mark along his forearm that he did not seem to have noticed yet. "Calm your arm." He glanced down, surprised as though the pain had not caught up with him until she pointed it out. "It is nothing serious. It needs tending regardless. Come with me. I know where the medical supplies are kept." He did not argue, which told her more about the severity of the burn than his words did. She led him to a small storage room near the kitchens, sat him down on a wooden stool, and began cleaning the wound with careful, practiced hands, the same steadiness she used when treating an injured horse. "You are good at this," he said, watching her work. "My father taught me. Horses get hurt often enough that I learned young how to tend a wound properly." She wrapped a clean bandage around his forearm, tying it off with a neat knot. "There. Try not to set anything else on fire before it heals. I will do my best, though I make no promises." They sat together in the quiet aftermath, the adrenaline of the morning slowly fading, replaced by a tired kind of closeness that neither of them tried to name. Ilara found herself studying him again, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the careful way he held himself even now, exhausted and burned and covered in soot. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask. I cannot promise I will answer." That fire started in the hay store, which is kept locked at night. Nobody uses a flame anywhere near it. How does something like that happen? Colm's expression shifted, just slightly, something guarded creeping back into his eyes. Accidents happen on estates this size. A spark from a lantern left too close, perhaps. These things are rarely as mysterious as they seem. You sound very certain for someone who was not there when it started. I simply do not believe in searching for mysteries where none exist. He stood, testing the bandage on his arm, avoiding her gaze. I should help clear the wreckage before the steward arrives to survey the damage. Gareth Holt, Ilara said, remembering the name from her earlier introductions. The estate steward. Is he difficult to work under? Something almost like amusement flickered across Colm's face. He believes himself very important. He is not always wrong to believe it, though he could stand to remember that the people beneath him are not simply tools for his convenience. You speak boldly for a stable hand talking about his superior. Do I? He paused at the doorway, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite decipher. Perhaps I simply believe every person deserves to be spoken of with some measure of fairness, regardless of their station. He left before she could respond, and Ilara sat alone in the small storage room for a long moment, turning his words over in her mind. There was a wisdom in the way he spoke that did not match a life spent mucking stalls and mending fences. She had noticed it the first day, and every day since had only deepened the impression. But whenever she tried to ask him directly about his past, he steered the conversation elsewhere with the practiced ease of someone who had done it many times before. Over the following weeks, their friendship deepened in small, quiet ways. Colm began appearing at the training ring in the early mornings, offering to help with the difficult colt Ilara had been working to calm. He had a gift with animals that went beyond simple patience, an understanding that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than experience alone. Under his guidance, the colt that had once bolted in terror during the fire began to trust human hands again, walking calmly beside Ilara during their morning sessions. "You have done wonderful work with him," Colm said one morning, watching the colt walk a slow, obedient circle around the ring. "He trusts you completely now." "We both worked with him," Ilara said. "I could not have calmed him half as quickly without your help. Perhaps we make a good team." The words hung in the air between them, simple but weighted with something neither of them addressed directly. Ilara felt her cheeks warm and busied herself with adjusting the colt's lead rope, unwilling to examine too closely why his words affected her the way they did. It was not only the training sessions that drew them together. Ilara began noticing small kindnesses that accumulated day after day, quiet gestures that spoke louder than any grand declaration could have. A cluster of wildflowers left on her workbench with no note attached, though she always knew who had placed them there. A warm cup of tea appearing beside her during the coldest mornings, just when the chill had begun to settle deep into her bones. Once, when Gareth Holt tried to assign her an impossible workload on top of her regular duties, she found the task quietly redistributed among the other staff before she had even finished arguing her case, and she strongly suspected Colm's quiet intervention had something to do with it. "You did not have to speak to him on my behalf," she said, finding Colm near the training ring later that evening. "I did not speak to anyone," he said, though the corner of his mouth twitched in a way that suggested otherwise. Perhaps Gareth simply reconsidered on his own. "Gareth Holt does not strike me as a man who reconsiders anything on his own." "Then perhaps you are simply better at your work than he gave you credit for," and the evidence spoke for itself. She did not believe him, not entirely, but she let the matter rest, grateful regardless of the reason. It was becoming harder, with each passing week, to ignore the way her thoughts drifted toward him during quiet moments, the way she found herself looking forward to their mornings together more than she looked forward to anything else in her long days. For Colm, the growing friendship brought a different kind of struggle, one Ilara could not see. Late at night, after the stables had gone quiet and the last lanterns had been extinguished, he would sit alone in his small room above the stable offices, the same room he had occupied for 3 years while pretending to be nothing more than a hired hand. On the small desk beside his bed sat a stack of letters he had not yet answered, correspondence from lawyers and distant relatives who still did not know exactly where the Duke of Sternemoor had disappeared to, only that he had left careful instructions ensuring the estate continued to run smoothly in his absence. He had taken up this disguise 3 years earlier, following the collapse of an arranged engagement that had been negotiated by his late father, without ever considering what Colm himself might want. The woman in question had cared nothing for him, only for the title and the wealth that came attached to his name, and the realization had left him hollow, in a way he had not expected. He had walked away from that life quietly, leaving the running of Sternemoor to a trusted steward, while he disappeared into the very stables he now called home, choosing to become simply calm, a man valued for his hands and his patience, rather than the accident of his birth. He had not expected, in those 3 years, to feel anything close to what he felt now, sitting alone with Alara's laughter still echoing in his memory from earlier that day. She did not know his name, not his real one, and yet she had looked at him with more genuine warmth than anyone had offered him in years. It would be so easy, he thought, to let this continue exactly as it was. So easy, and so deeply unfair to her. But every time he considered telling her the truth, fear closed around his chest like a fist. What if the truth changed everything? What if the woman who smiled at him across the training ring each morning, who trusted him with her worries about her ailing father and her hopes for a better future, looked at him differently once she learned what he truly was? He had already lost one version of himself to the weight of his title. He was not ready to lose this one too. So he said nothing, and the days continued, each one drawing them closer together, each one building a foundation that neither of them fully understood they were standing on, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally have to surface, whether either of them was ready for it or not. Lightning split the sky just as Alara reached the stable doors, and the sound that followed was so loud it seemed to shake the ground beneath her feet. Inside, the horses were already in a state of near panic, ears pinned flat, hooves striking against wooden stalls with sharp, frightened cracks. The storm had rolled in faster than anyone predicted, turning a gray afternoon into a black, roaring night within the space of an hour, and Alara had run from the main house the moment she realized no one had checked on the animals since the rain began. "Easy," she called out, moving quickly down the row of stalls, checking latches, offering low words of comfort to horses too frightened to hear them. "Easy. I am here." Another crack of thunder rolled overhead, and somewhere near the back of the stable, wood splintered. Alara's stomach dropped. She ran toward the sound and found one of the older stall doors had cracked under the strain of a terrified mare throwing herself against it, the latch hanging loose, the wood beginning to give way entirely. "I need help back here," she shouted, though the wind howling outside swallowed most of her voice. Calm appeared moments later, soaked through from the rain outside, moving fast down the road toward her. Together they worked to brace the failing door, Alara holding the mare's attention with soft words while Calm forced a length of rope through the broken latch, tying it firm enough to hold until proper repairs could be made in daylight. By the time the immediate danger had passed, both of them were breathing hard, and the storm outside showed no sign of weakening. Rain hammered against the stable roof in relentless sheets, and when Colm moved to the main doors to check on conditions outside, he returned almost immediately, water dripping from his hair. "The path back to the main house is flooded," he said. "It is not safe to cross until the water recedes. We will need to wait it out here." Alara glanced toward the small window near the stable office, watching the storm rage with an intensity that showed no signs of easing. "How long do you think that will take?" "Hours, most likely. Possibly until morning." There was nothing to do but accept it. Alara found a stack of horse blankets in the storage room, and brought 2 of them out, along with a small oil lantern that cast a warm, flickering light against the stable walls. They settled into the empty stall at the end of the row, the same one that had once housed the young colt during the fire, now filled instead with soft, worn hay that made for surprisingly comfortable seating. "This is not exactly how I imagined spending the evening," Alara said, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders, still damp from the rain that had soaked through her clothes. "I imagine you had something warmer and drier in mind." "A great deal warmer and drier, yes." She managed a small laugh, though the sound of the storm outside kept her nerves from fully settling. "My mother always said storms like this one meant something was changing. She was very superstitious about weather." "And do you believe that?" "I did not, growing up, but sitting here now, I find myself wondering." Colman was quiet for a moment, watching the lantern light flicker against the stable walls. "My mother believed something similar. She used to say that the worst storms always arrived right before the most important moments in a person's life, as though the sky itself needed to clear its throat before anything significant could happen. That is a strange kind of comfort. She was a strange kind of woman. In the best possible way. A shadow of sadness crossed his face, there and gone quickly, the way it always seemed to be whenever he mentioned anything close to his past. "You rarely speak of your family," Alara said carefully, watching his reaction. "I have wondered about that." "There is not a great deal to say. My mother passed when I was young. My father and I did not see the world the same way, and by the time he was gone, there was very little left unsaid between us that mattered." He kept his eyes fixed on the lantern flame rather than on her. "It is not a subject I find comfort discussing. I am sorry. I did not mean to press." You did not press. You asked a fair question, and I gave you the answer I am able to give. He finally looked at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression that she had not seen from him before. There is a great deal about my past that I have not shared with anyone here, Alara. It is not because I do not trust you. It is because I am not certain how to share it without everything changing. Her heart quickened at the weight in his words, though she could not have said exactly why. Changing how? I do not know how to explain it without frightening you, or worse, without making you see me differently than you do now. He shook his head slightly, as though arguing with himself. There are things about who I am that most people at Sternemoor do not know, things that would surprise you. Thunder rolled again outside, quieter this time, the storm beginning to ease. Alara studied him in the lantern light, the careful, guarded look in his eyes that seemed to be weighing something enormous, deciding whether to let it fall. You do not have to tell me tonight, she said gently. Whatever it is, you do not owe me an explanation simply because we are trapped together during a storm. I know I do not owe it to you. His voice was quiet, almost rough. But I find that I want to give it anyway, and that frightens me more than the storm does. Why does it frighten you? Because the moment I tell you, I cannot take it back, and I have spent 3 years being someone who is allowed to simply exist without expectation, without the weight of a name that changes how people look at me. With you, for the first time in longer than I can remember, I have felt like a man rather than a title. I am terrified that telling you the truth will take that away. Alara sat very still, turning his words over carefully. Whatever he was hiding, it clearly weighed on him in a way that went far beyond simple embarrassment or shame. She thought of the notebook he had hidden that first night, the careful way he spoke, the wisdom he carried that did not match a stable hand's life. Pieces of a puzzle she had never quite assembled, though perhaps some part of her had always suspected there was more to him than what appeared on the surface. Call him, she said softly. Whatever you tell me, or do not tell me, will not change how I see the man who pulled me out of a burning stable, or who sat with me tonight during a storm neither of us wanted to be caught in. That man has already shown me who he is, again and again, in 100 small ways. A name is only a small part of a person. Something shifted in his expression, a tension easing that she had not fully realized was there. You say that with such certainty. I have spent my whole life watching people judged by their circumstances rather than their character. My father lost everything when his health failed, and suddenly people who once respected him treated him as though he had become invisible. I decided a long time ago that I would not make that same mistake with anyone. Colm reached out slowly, as though giving her every opportunity to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of damp hair from her face. His hand lingered there, warm against her cold skin, and Alara found she did not want to move away at all. I have wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted quietly. Then why did you not? Because I was not certain you felt the same way. And because every day I did not tell you, telling you became harder rather than easier. You could tell me now, she whispered, whatever it is. He looked at her for a long moment, torn between the truth pressing against his chest and the fear of what it might cost him, and in the end, he did not speak the words at all. Instead, he leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to stop him, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though he were still uncertain whether this was truly wanted. But when Alara's hand came up to rest against his chest, pulling him closer rather than pushing him away, something in him relaxed entirely, and the kiss deepened into something warmer, something that felt like months of unspoken feeling finally given permission to exist. When they finally parted, both of them slightly breathless, the storm outside had softened into a gentle, steady rain, the worst of it clearly having passed. That was not what I meant to say, Colm said, a small, disbelieving laugh escaping him. I did not mind the substitution, Alara said, resting her forehead against his, her heart still racing from more than just the storm. They sat together in comfortable silence after that, the lantern burning low, the rain tapping softly against the roof above them. Colm's arms settled around her shoulders, and Alara leaned into him without hesitation, feeling, for the first time in longer than she could remember, entirely at peace. I still have not told you, Colm said eventually, his voice barely above a murmur. I know, Alara said, but I am not going anywhere. Whenever you are ready, I will still be here. He held her a little tighter at that, though his mind was already turning toward the harvest ball that loomed only weeks away, an event he could not avoid attending as himself, an event that would tear away every careful piece of the disguise he had built for 3 years, whether he was ready to let it fall or not. For now, though, wrapped in worn blankets in a quiet stable while the storm faded into gentle rain, he allowed himself simply to exist in the moment, holding the one person who had ever made him feel like more than his name, and less than his fears. Morning arrived gray and washed clean. The flooded path finally receded enough to cross. They walked back toward the main house together in comfortable silence, hands brushing occasionally, neither of them quite ready to name what had changed between them, though both of them understood something significant had shifted during the long night in the stable. Ilara did not know, walking beside him in the pale morning light, that the man she had fallen for over quiet mornings and shared burdens was preparing, in a matter of weeks, to stand at the top of a grand staircase as someone she had never met at all. She only knew that her heart had opened toward him more fully than she had ever allowed it to open toward anyone, and that whatever secret he still carried, she trusted him enough to wait for it. It was a trust that would soon be tested more severely than either of them could yet imagine. The carriages began arriving before noon, and by the time the sun began sinking behind the western towers, the entire estate had transformed into something Ilara barely recognized. She stood near the edge of the courtyard in her plain work dress, watching fine carriages roll through the gates one after another, delivering guests dressed in silks and jewels she had only ever seen in old magazines passed around the servants' quarters. Lanterns had been strung along every path, and inside the great house, she could hear the faint sound of a string quartet warming up for the evening ahead. "The whole county has been invited," said Nell Bridger, a fellow member of the household staff who had become something of a friend over the past weeks. "They say the Duke himself is finally returning for it. Nobody has seen him properly in years." Ilara's stomach tightened slightly at the mention of the mysterious Duke, though she could not have said why the thought unsettled her. She had heard the whispers before, the same rumors Colm had mentioned on her very first day, that the man who owned Sternemoor kept strange hours and rarely showed his face. She had never given it much thought beyond simple curiosity. "Do you think he will actually appear tonight?" she asked. "Mrs. Pemberton says preparations have been made specifically for his arrival. New clothes tailored. His private rooms aired out and cleaned properly for the first time in years. Something has certainly changed." Nell's eyes sparkled with the kind of gossip that traveled fast through servant quarters. "Perhaps he has finally decided to settle down and take a wife. That would explain the timing of it all." The words settled uncomfortably in Ilara's chest, though she pushed the feeling aside as unreasonable jealousy over a man she had never met and had no claim to whatsoever. She had far more pressing matters to consider that evening, chiefly among them the fact that she had not seen Colm since early morning, and something about his absence throughout the day felt strange in a way she could not quite name. She found a quiet moment near dusk to slip away toward the stables, hoping to catch him before the evening's chaos fully consumed the estate. But the stables were empty, quieter than she had ever seen them, and none of the other hands could tell her where Colm had gone. "Probably resting before his shift tonight," one of the boys suggested with a shrug. "Big night for the whole estate. Everyone wants to be prepared." Uneasy but unable to explain why, Ilara returned to her duties, assisting with the final preparations for the evening. By the time the ball itself began, the great house had been transformed entirely, every window glowing gold, music spilling out into the courtyard, guests filling the grand hall in a swirl of color and laughter. Ilara had been given a rare evening's permission to observe the festivities briefly from the servants' gallery overlooking the main hall, a small privilege occasionally extended to staff on significant occasions. She stood near the railing, watching the dancing below, still searching the crowd for any sign of Colm among the household staff assisting with the event. Then a hush fell across the room. The great doors at the top of the staircase opened, and a man stepped through them dressed in fine dark clothing, tailored perfectly to his frame, his dark hair combed back neatly from a face Ilara knew better than her own reflection. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Colm, but it was not Colm at all, not the man she knew, not the quiet stable hand with soot on his hands and hay in his hair. This man stood with an entirely different bearing, straight-backed and composed, every inch of him carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. The crowd below erupted into applause and eager greetings, voices calling out from every direction. "Your Grace, welcome home. Your Grace, it has been far too long. Your Grace, the estate has missed your presence terribly." Ilara gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white, her mind refusing at first to accept what her eyes were showing her. But there was no mistaking him, not the shape of his jaw, not the particular way he held himself even now, still recognizable beneath the transformation. The man descending the grand staircase, greeted by lords and ladies alike as the Duke of Sternemoor, was the same man who had kissed her gently in a stable during a storm, who had told her he was terrified of what the truth might cost him. Now she understood exactly what that truth had been, and exactly why he had been so afraid to share it. She did not remember leaving the gallery. She only remembered finding herself outside in the cool night air, her chest tight, her thoughts spinning too fast to settle on any single feeling. Betrayal came first, sharp and immediate, followed quickly by a deep, aching hurt that went far beyond simple embarrassment. She had shared things with him, real things, her fears about her father's health, her hopes for a better future, her heart itself, and he had accepted all of it, while withholding the single most important piece of who he truly was. Ilara. She turned to find him standing several paces away, still dressed in his fine clothes, looking entirely unlike the man she had fallen for and yet undeniably the same person underneath it all. He had followed her out, leaving his own celebration behind, his expression carrying an urgency that told her he understood exactly what she had witnessed. "Do not," she said, her voice shaking with an anger she rarely allowed herself to feel. "Do not come near me right now. Please, let me explain." "Explain what, exactly?" She stepped back from him, arms wrapped tightly around herself. That the man who told me he trusted me enough to eventually share the truth was actually the duke of this entire estate the whole time? That every conversation we had, every moment I thought was real between two equals, was actually a lie you allowed to continue because it was convenient for you? "It was never convenient," he said, pain evident in every word. "It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I hated every day that I could not tell you." "Then why did you not simply tell me? We had countless opportunities. That night during the storm, you had every chance to say it plainly, and instead you kissed me and let me believe there was still time." "Because I was afraid," he admitted, his composed exterior finally cracking under the weight of her anger. "I was afraid that the moment you knew, everything between us would change, that you would see the title instead of the man. I have spent 3 years running from that exact fear, Ilara. And for the first time, someone looked at me without it clouding everything else. I could not bear the thought of losing that. So instead you decided I did not deserve the choice to decide for myself." Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, though she refused to let them fall in front of him. "You took that choice away from me, Colum, or whoever you truly are. You let me fall in love with half a man, and I never even had the chance to say whether I wanted the other half too." The words hung between them, raw and undeniable, and Colm had no answer that could soften the truth of what she had said. He had made a choice, weeks ago, to protect himself rather than trust her fully. And now the consequences of that choice stood before him, hurt and furious, and entirely justified in her anger. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "There are no words that will undo the harm I have caused you tonight. I know that. But I am asking you, please, do not leave without letting me try to make this right. I need time," Ilara said, backing further away. "I need time away from you, away from this entire estate, to understand what any of this even means anymore." She turned and walked into the darkness before he could respond, leaving him standing alone in the cool night air, the sounds of celebration continuing obliviously behind him inside the great house. He did not follow her. He understood, even through his own desperation, that following her now would only deepen the wound rather than heal it. Ilara did not return to her room above the stable offices that night. Instead, she packed what few belongings she had brought with her, her hands trembling as she folded each item with mechanical precision, refusing to let herself think too deeply about what she was doing until the task was finished. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, she was already walking down the long road away from Sternemoor estate, her small bag over her shoulder, her heart carrying a weight far heavier than anything packed inside it. She did not know where she was going, only that she could not remain in a place where every path, every stable, every quiet corner now carried the memory of a man she had trusted completely, and who had, in the end, decided she was not owed the whole truth. Behind her, Sternemoor's windows dimmed one by one as the celebration finally ended, and somewhere inside, the newly returned Duke of the estate sat alone in rooms that had once belonged to his father, staring at nothing, understanding with a clarity that felt like physical pain that he had finally lost the one thing his title could never buy back. The knock at the cottage door came just as the rain began to fall again, 3 weeks after Ilara had walked away from Sternemoor, without looking back. She had returned to Blackmere, to the small stone cottage where her mother still cared for her ailing father, and had thrown herself into the familiar rhythms of home, with a determination that left little room for thought. She mended fences, tended the few horses her family still kept, sat by her father's bedside reading to him in the evenings when his strength allowed it. She told herself this was enough, that the ache in her chest would fade with time and distance, the same way most wounds eventually did. It had not faded. Her mother opened the door that evening, and Ilara heard the low murmur of voices from the kitchen where she sat mending a torn blanket by the fire. Something in the tone made her set the needle down, a strange, unsettled feeling rising in her chest before she had even seen who stood at the threshold. "Elara," her mother called. "You have a visitor." She rose slowly, smoothing her simple dress, bracing herself, without knowing exactly what she was bracing against. When she stepped into the front room, she found Colm standing just inside the doorway, rain dripping from his hair and shoulders, dressed not in the fine clothes she had seen him wear at the ball, but in the same worn stable clothes he had worn the very first day they met. For a long moment neither of them spoke. "You should not have come," Elara said finally, though her voice lacked the sharp edge her words carried. "I know," he said. "I came anyway. I hope you will forgive that much, even if you cannot forgive anything else." Her mother, sensing the weight in the room, quietly excused herself back toward the kitchen, leaving the two of them alone by the dim glow of a single lamp. Elara crossed her arms, holding herself steady, though every instinct urged her either to demand he leave immediately or to close the distance between them entirely. She did neither, simply waiting. "I did not come as the Duke," Colm said, gesturing at his plain clothes. "I came as myself, the man you actually knew, because that is the only version of myself I want you to see, whether you decide to forgive me or not. I have spent 3 weeks trying to find the right words, and I am not certain I have found them yet, but I could not stay away any longer without at least trying." "Then try," Elara said quietly. He took a slow breath, gathering himself. "My name is Colm Ashford. I am the Duke of Sternemoor, a title I inherited when my father passed, along with an estate, a fortune, and a life I never truly wanted for myself. When I was younger, my father arranged an engagement for me, a match built entirely on wealth and standing, with a woman who cared nothing for who I was as a person. She looked at me and saw only what my name could provide her. When that engagement finally collapsed under the weight of its own falseness, I realized I did not know a single person in my life who valued me for anything beyond my title." He paused, watching her carefully, gauging whether she wanted him to continue. When she said nothing, simply waited, he pressed on. "So I left. I told my steward to manage the estate, gave strict instructions that my absence be kept quiet, and I disappeared into the stables I had wandered through as a boy, back when they were the only place at Sternemoor that ever felt honest to me. I became Colm, simply Colm, a man with nothing but his hands and his patience to offer. For 3 years that was enough. Nobody expected anything from me beyond good, honest work, and for the first time since my mother passed, I felt like myself rather than a role I was performing. And then I arrived," Elara said softly. "And then you arrived," he agreed. "And everything I thought I understood about my careful, quiet life began to change. You looked at me the way no one had looked at me in years, without calculation, without seeing anything except the man standing in front of you. I told myself I would find the right moment to tell you the truth, and every day that passed without telling you, the fear grew larger rather than smaller. I was not protecting some careful plan, Elara. I was protecting myself, out of pure cowardice, because I could not bear the thought of losing the one honest thing in my life." "You did lose it," she said, though there was less anger in her voice now than there had been weeks ago. "You lost it the moment you chose fear over honesty." "I know." He took a step closer, though he stopped well short of reaching for her, giving her every room to retreat if she wished. "I am not here tonight to ask you to simply forget what I did, or to pretend the hurt I caused you does not matter. I am here because I have spent 3 weeks at Sternemoor without you, sitting in rooms too large and too quiet, surrounded by staff who address me by a title that has never once felt like it belonged to me, and I have understood more clearly with each passing day that none of it means anything if I cannot share it honestly with the person who taught me what honesty actually feels like." The beacon went off at 07:43 station time, and every single screen in my office lit up at the same moment. Not one screen, not two, every screen. "How do I know the next time something frightens you, you will not disappear behind another lie?" "You do not know," Colm admitted. "I cannot give you certainty, only my word. And I understand my word carries less weight now than it once did. But I am asking you to consider this. I did not send a letter. I did not send a servant with an apology on my behalf. I traveled here myself, in these clothes, because I wanted you to see the truth of who I am standing in front of you, without any title standing between us, exactly the way you first knew me." The rain continued outside, steady against the cottage windows, and Elara found herself studying him in the dim lamplight, searching for any trace of the calculation she feared might still be hiding beneath his words. She found none, only the same quiet, earnest man who had pulled her from a burning stable, who had held her through a storm, who had trusted her with pieces of his grief even before he trusted her with his name. "If I agree to hear more," she said slowly. There are things I need from you. Real things. Not simply promises spoken in a moment of desperation. Anything. Honesty. Always. Even when it frightens you. If something is difficult to say, you say it anyway, rather than allowing me to discover it on my own, the way I discovered your title in front of half the county. You have my word. And I will not simply become a duchess who exists to smile beside you at events and manage a household she never asked for. Whatever this becomes, I will not lose myself inside your world, the way you nearly lost yourself inside it. I would never ask that of you, he said, and something in the fierce sincerity of his voice convinced her more than any of his earlier words had. I fell for a groomswoman who climbed a fence to save a frightened horse before she had even unpacked her bags. I have no interest in losing that woman to a role neither of us actually wants. Alara felt the last of her guarded resistance finally begin to soften, though the hurt of the past weeks did not vanish entirely, nor did she expect it to. Some wounds simply needed time alongside forgiveness, both working together rather than one replacing the other. You should sit down, she said finally, gesturing toward the chair near the fire. You are soaked through, and my mother will never forgive me if I let a guest catch a chill in her front room. A small, hopeful smile broke across his face. The first genuine smile she had seen from him since the ball. Does this mean I am forgiven? It means you are welcome to dry off by the fire while I decide, she said, though the warmth in her own voice betrayed her more than she intended. He sat, and for a long while they talked quietly beside the fire, not about titles or estates or the weight of hidden truths, but about small, ordinary things, the way they had during those early mornings at the training ring, before either of them understood how deeply they had already begun to matter to each other. Alara found herself laughing again, genuinely, for the first time in 3 weeks, and watching Colm across the firelight, still dressed in his simple stable clothes despite everything he could have worn instead, she felt something in her chest begin to loosen that had been tightly wound since the night of the ball. He did not stay that first evening, understanding that trust rebuilt too quickly rarely held its shape properly. But he returned the following week, and the week after that, always in his plain clothes, always patient, always careful to prove through consistent, honest action what his words alone could not fully repair. Slowly, gradually, Alara allowed herself to trust him again, not blindly, but deliberately, watching him choose honesty again and again in the small moments that mattered most. Months later, Alara stood once more in the stables at Sternemoor, though everything about her presence there had changed entirely. She was no longer simply the head groomswoman, though she still insisted on tending the horses herself most mornings, unwilling to give up the work that had first brought her here, and had never once stopped feeling like home. The staff addressed her differently now, with a respect that acknowledged both who she had become and who she had always been underneath it. Colm found her there most mornings, exactly where he had found her on countless mornings before, working alongside the very colt they had once saved together, during a fire that felt like it belonged to another lifetime entirely. He no longer hid behind a false name or a careful disguise, and she no longer had to wonder what truths remained unspoken between them. You are late this morning, Alara said without turning, recognizing his footsteps in the yard behind her. I was delayed by a steward who insists on discussing grain shipments before breakfast, Colm said, coming to stand beside her at the fence, watching the colt move in easy, confident circles around the ring. I have told him repeatedly that mornings belong to the horses, but he remains unconvinced. Perhaps you should introduce him to Ash properly. Nothing convinces a person of priorities faster than a colt determined to test them. Colm laughed, the sound easy and unguarded in a way it had rarely been during those first careful months of their friendship. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, their fingers intertwining naturally, comfortably, the way they had learned to fit together through honesty rather than pretense. I never imagined, he said quietly, watching the morning light spread golden across the training ring, that the truest thing in my life would begin exactly where I tried hardest to hide from everything I was. Perhaps that is precisely why it worked, Alara said, leaning into him. You stopped hiding, and I was simply here, waiting to see who you actually were. They stood together in comfortable silence, the estate stretching out around them, vast and grand and no longer carrying the weight of secrets between its walls. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever adjustments remained as Alara learned the unfamiliar rhythms of a life she had never expected to lead, she faced them now with the same steady courage that had first drawn Colm to her, standing beside the man she had fallen for long before she ever knew his name, and loving him fully now that she finally did.